Tell me about your grandparents, Barry and Irene Broderick.
Okay. Barry, he loved to go out to his little shed where he could work on things. And so you'd see him out there all the time, just making some different things or fixing something. That was one of the things that I've always admired about him. He really loved to have his family down. We went down there quite frequently because my dad had a really good relationship with him. And so we would go and we would play rook with him. And so he had his wits about him clear pretty much till the end of his life. Irene, she got hurt when she was younger. And so she was always on a round stool that had wheels on the bottom. And so she would push herself around with her feet. She loved to bake. So she would bake cakes and brownies and different things like that. They had an old stove. It was a coal burning stove. So Grandpa would go out and get coal, and she would keep the fire stoked. And then that's how they kept their home warm, but it's also how they did their cooking. And so she would cook for us all the time. And she loved to tell stories. She would get us around and she would tell stories about when she was young or later on with the children and stuff. And I think about the kids that grow up now and they are so disrespectful of their elders. It used to be that honoring your elders was something that was just expected in it and it was natural. But in today's day and age, children don't respect the elders near as much. Yeah, their generation was totally different. Grandma and Grandpa's was. And then obviously my parents, things changed so much between my grandparents and my parents, the way they lived and transportation and different things. And then you drop down one more level to me and my generation, and it's changed totally. And then you get to your generation and you get another huge change. So things are changing quickly. And I think about even in the next 20 years, you're going to have probably most vehicles you get in your car, you push a button and it takes you to the office, takes you to the store or whatever, or they probably just, you order online all your food and push a button and they bring it out and it's delivered automatically. It's probably my guess. And Amazon will start this huge program of delivering groceries automatically, and they'll have an automated system. And anyway, things will be different in the future.
So if you think about your kids and grandkids learning about your parents and grandparents, what attributes would you like them to learn and to apply in their lives?
My grandparents and my parents were very hard workers. They were not slackers at all. I know my dad, he worked constantly, and my mom, she was always gardening and bottling fruit and tomato juice and making bread and making different things. So my mom was busy, and my dad worked many hours. He didn't put in a normal day's work. He worked many hours. And so that's one thing I would like to see. And the one thing I feel bad about, even though we read the Book of Mormon every morning and we sang and prayed, but I wish I would have explained the scriptures to him. We would read half of what we did, and then we would talk about it and explain what it should mean in their lives. So I guess that's the one thing I would pass on that I think that the next generation needs. I think they need to understand who Christ is and better understand the scriptures. I should have taught my children to love going to the temple. We went to the temple periodically, but we didn't ever explain to our children how we felt about it. And even though I had 5.5 children that went on missions, I wish I would have prepared my children better and set their sights all on going on a mission. All 10 of them have been sealed in the temple, but I could have done a lot better job. And I wish I would have put my efforts in showing them the love I have for the Savior, for the scriptures, for going to the temple, and things like that.
Moving on to when your parents met, I guess just thinking about their relationship over time, what impresses you about their relationship?
You know, I never remember my parents getting in any fights. Every once in a while, they would disagree on something. My dad, he was very stubborn. And so if there was something that he wanted to do and my mom was not all keen on it, every once in a while there'd be a discussion about that. But it was never, they never raised their voices at each other that I remember. And so they always had a loving relationship and passed that on to their children. You know, it gets harder and harder. Each generation seems like it's so easy to get a divorce and then you just get someone else. And that's just, well, obviously, in my opinion, that's not the way to do it. You pray about who you're going to marry, then you marry him, and then you're into it for the long haul. Anyway, they showed a lot of love towards each other. And my mom was extremely patient and let my dad kind of do his thing, whatever he wanted to do. And she was devoted to him. She was very loyal to him constantly. No matter what he did, she would be loyal and help out where she could.
I just thought it was kind of interesting that your father's in his 60s, and the reason he moves is to find work. I don't know. It just kind of struck me. Yeah.
His business went belly up, and so he there was reasons, and it wasn't really his fault, even though, you know, you really have to look at the top and say, whose fault is it? And he had to take responsibility for it, but he tried to help out his cousins and took over their business, and it was a business that was losing money. So it just kept losing money. And so he lost his business.
Removed in time.
He lost his business in 1973. And so in 1982, that would have been 9 years later, he went to Emory and they lived there for some time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they would have moved to Emory after he lost his business, but there just wasn't, you know, he kept bees for the church, made $1,000 a month, but that's just not a whole lot of money to live on. So I'm guessing that's why Alma probably said, hey, you know, come down here and I think you can do well. So then he went there, then he went to Henryville, and then off to St. George.
Your earliest memories would be in Hurricane?
Yeah, I was 4 when we moved from Hurricane to Orem.
So mostly Orem. Tell me about growing up in Orem.
I loved Orem. It was a great place to grow up. We lived on a dirt road to begin with. So there was 10 of us in a 2-bedroom home. Tony stayed with my mom and dad in their bedroom. The 3 boys, we slept in the cellar, which was literally just, there was no cement floors or anything. It was a dirt floor and dirt sidewalls. We could look underneath the house all the way across. And if there was black widows and tarantulas, we played with the tarantulas and killed the black widows. And I remember Bert did something wrong. And so my dad made him stay out in the chicken coop, which had a lot of doo-doo in it. And my sisters, there were 6 of them. So my dad built a triple double bunk bed. So it's 2 children wide, 3 high. And so all 6 of the girls slept in that bedroom, and we had 1 bathroom. So if you can imagine 10 people sharing 1 bathroom, we were given times, and we could not stay in the bathroom too long. And we couldn't go in there and put makeup on and stuff for very long. Not that I did, but the girls, a lot of them wanted to wear makeup a little bit and look nice. And so they would go in there to have the mirror. And I remember frequently wanting to get into the bathroom and have to wait outside of the bathroom to get inside. And so we had a lot of trees around the yard. It was a pretty big lot. And so obviously us guys, sometimes we would just go find a tree. I remember one time I was doing my business and my sister Viona came around from somewhere and I'm sitting there squatting. Anyway, it was an interesting time. After a year or two, my dad bought a mobile home, which he put right next to the house. And the 4 boys, we moved out into the mobile home. So we were only in the cellar for a year and a half, 2 years. But you can imagine in the wintertime, I don't even remember how we kept it warm. But when you had to go to the bathroom, you literally went out of the cellar, outside the house, around the corner, back in the house. And I remember having to go bad, and you'd go in there and the bathroom would be occupied. And so you'd squat outside of the bathroom, waiting for it to become available. And here I am, and maybe it's the reason, but I've been living here in this home for 13 years, and it's a 12-bedroom, 12-bath home. And so we have a bathroom for every child and a bedroom for every child. And maybe it stemmed from when I was a young child waiting to go to the bathroom. And so I didn't want my children to have to wait. Roger was always so fun. He would create so many games that we would play. Then my dad, he loved to film them on his 8mm camera. And so we have a lot of footage of when we were growing up and the different games that Roger would create. He loved to go to the dump. And so I would go to the dump with him, and we would find all sorts of treasures of stuff that people would throw away that we could do something with. And some of the funner ones, I remember we got all these bags of powdered milk. And so Roger would go down the road from the dump to our house. He'd be going like 65, 70 miles an hour. We'd take these bags of powdered milk and we'd throw them down on the pavement as we were going really hard. And it'd go, poof, and it would put out this screen that nobody behind us could see. And he found all of these straps 2 inches wide of rubber that came off of, don't know exactly where they came off of, but we would weave them into about 1.5 inch round cord. And we would put them between 2 trees and then put an inner tube tire over them in the middle. Then you'd have someone help pull it down, and you'd put your feet in between the inner tube and hold on to the sides, and then they could pull the strap down and let it go, and you'd go flying in the air. And you wouldn't come out of your strap usually, but you'd go flying back and forth. And he found these huge inner tubes from one of these places that repairs big trucks. And so he would have these inner tubes that when they were stood up, they were a good 6.5 feet tall, and laying down, they'd still be about 2 feet off the ground. And so then one time we'd have 3 or 4 of them, we'd pile them on top of each other. And then he got all sorts of other inner tubes, and we'd pile those on top of those. And then I would crawl up through the middle of them and try to get all the way to the top. And I remember one time I fell off and landed on my back, and I hit so hard that I could not breathe. And Betty figured I was going to die because I was pretty well. Anyway, Betty made a live sketch, and one of them was the inner tubes that I climbed up and fell off of. She shows my 9 lives that I've spent in various activities of my life. Anyway, what were you asking me?
Your parents' love of singing.
What was it?
Their love of singing.
My parents' love of singing. In the home and pretty much everywhere. They loved to go to rest homes and places like that. And my mom was on the accordion, and my dad had a guitar. And sometimes he would play it, sometimes he wouldn't. But they would go around and sing every opportunity they got. And they never made any money doing it, but they just did it to bring joy and happiness to those, to as many as people as they could. And some of their favorite songs, they'd always sing "Home, Home on the Range." I still remember, and even when I think about that song now, because I never hear it unless I hear it in my mind from my parents, it reminds me of them and their love of singing. And I remember they were still so in love. My dad would reach over after they'd sing a song and kiss my mom on the cheeks, and they'd sing these love songs. And there were these plays in Orem. They were in the Sierra Theater or just a couple other places. My dad would volunteer and he would sing in it. So he was in Finnegan's Rainbow, and another one was Fiddler on the Roof. He loved to go play and perform. All of us, even today, I don't know that any of the children had any issues with any of the other children. So it's a tribute to my parents that we were brought up in love to the point that we still love each other, love to get together and catch up on everybody's what's happening in the families, and so we still have a sibling get together every year, and we enjoy talking on the phone together, and so that's a tribute to my parents, the love that they had and the giving that they had. They were always willing to do whatever for their kids and sacrificed. I remember at Christmas time, it was so fun because we were pretty poor, but at Christmas, we always got some Christmas toys. And so I remember hardly being able to sleep Christmas night. When we got up, we'd get up there and we'd go sneak and look around the trees and the Christmas tree and wait for when Mom said we could start opening the presents. And we would usually open them at 4 or 5 in the morning. That's when all the kids would be awake by. And I remember my dad a couple of times, he had these blocks that were left over from it. Back then, 2x4 would be 8 feet long. And so they'd cut off, maybe 5 or 6 inches off of them to build. And so he had tons of these blocks. And he'd give them to us at Christmas time. And then we would build all of these towers, these castles and different things with hundreds and hundreds of these 2x4 blocks. And we'd build them clear up to the ceiling in our house in the basement. We moved to a different home that had 4 bedrooms in it. And it had a furnace room that we slept in. And so when we moved to the Green Hall house, it was a lot bigger home, and the basement family room had a cement floor with those old tiles that are really thin. Anyway, so we could build these castles all the way to the ceiling. We'd build them like 4 feet wide to begin with, and then get smaller as you go up. And so then we could open the bottom of them by taking out some of the blocks, and then we would get inside the castle, and someone then would start taking them off until it would all fall down. And anyway, we had a blast with, and it wasn't like he spent a lot of money, but he would make sure they were all exactly the same size, and so that we could build them up. We took a lot of trips. We did a lot of fishing, and my dad made a boat and took a bus and turned it into kind of like a motorhome, and we'd all go on trips together. They enjoyed doing things with the family. We had family home evening on Monday nights. My mom would typically give the lesson, and you could just tell that they loved the gospel and loved having their family around them.
How did you feel about moving to Michigan?
Terrible. All my friends were in Utah. We had lived there ever since I was 4. We lived in Orem. And so it was a tough transition. In Utah, almost everybody in the school was Mormon because it was Orem. And you get out to Michigan, and there was only a couple other families in the high school that were members. And so making friends, but they lived quite a ways away. It wasn't my favorite thing, but we did a lot of fun things out there in Michigan. There was a river about 2 blocks away, pretty big river. And so we would go there and build boats, and there was a railroad track that went right along the river. And so we would put coins on the railroad tracks and flatten them. And we had kites and frisbees and stuff. There was a golf course right on the edge of the river there. And so we would go throw frisbees and do fun things in the area. But and my dad did real well. I remember times that he'd come home and he'd talk to mom, and in a 2-month period, remember once they added up and I heard what they made, and they made $5,200 in 2 months. And so it's $2,600 a month. And so compared to what he was making in Orem before we moved, he was making like $600 a month, $600 to $1,000. And so we bought a new car, bought a new boat. We were a lot better off financially. And I remember once, I got to share this one with you. I was down the railroad tracks putting coins on them to flatten them, and I was the only one down there. And I was in junior high. All of a sudden, these boys came down, and where the road went over the river, you could kind of hide under there, and people wouldn't be able to see you. The bridge, anyway, they brought cigarettes and alcohol, and they knew I was a Mormon. They knew that I didn't drink or smoke, and so they were going to force me, and they called me and had me come over by them, and I didn't dare get real close. And then they were talking between each other, and they said, "He doesn't smoke or drink. He's one of those Mormons, and they asked me, "Have you ever?" And I said, "No." So they said, "Well, we're going to force you into it." And I just started running as fast as I could, and had to run up this hill to get up where the road came. And I remember they were right behind me. I mean, they were just kind of barely touching the heels of my feet as I was running up to get away from them. And I got away, but it was kind of scary, It was kind of a challenging time. It was a time that, you had to more live your religion. Everybody knew what you were, and the spotlight was on your actions to see if you would live up to the teachings of the Mormon religion.
Did you leave on your mission from Orem?
I did. We came back. We only were out there for a little over a year and a half. We moved back to Orem, into the same home that we left the Greenhall home. My dad, he went out of business while we lived there. And so we started moving just as I was graduating high school. And he moved down to Emory in 73. I graduated in 74. So there was 1 year, my senior year, I stayed in the house with Janine, and Glenn and Larry moved upstairs. So they bought our home. And Janine and I lived in the basement because I wanted to graduate from Orem High. I didn't want to go to Emory High. So then I left from Emory. But pretty much every weekend I spent up in Orem because I started dating Janice, and we got engaged. And so I stayed up here, even though wherever I worked, it didn't matter. I would spend the weekends up in Utah County with my future wife.
And your mission was
Thailand.
Thailand. Wow. How was that?
Thailand was extremely difficult. I'll tell you a couple of unique experiences I had. When I left on my mission, I didn't have a testimony of the gospel. I had never felt the spirit that I knew of. And just before I went on my mission, when I was 18, I went out selling books in California. While I was out there, I figured, well, just because I was brought up Mormon doesn't mean that Mormon church is true. And I was away from my family finally. And so I went to all sorts of the different religions and studied with all the major ones and went to the different churches. And so then I decided I needed to know. And so I fasted for 3 days, and I prayed and prayed and prayed, and nothing happened. I don't know as I felt the spirit. So when I finally left on my mission, I decided to go anyway. And in the MTC, the only place you could find privacy was at night in the showers. So I would go in the showers in the locker room and I prayed. And I remember banging my head against the lockers because I hadn't received a testimony. Anyway, we were 2 months in the LTM and then we got shipped over to Thailand. And Elder Gordon B Hinckley came to my mission. And since there was an apostle coming, which isn't very often, everybody came from everywhere. And we had one big chapel in Bangkok. And so there was all the members, all the missionaries came from everywhere. And I was a greenie in the country only 3 days. And so they had us greenie missionaries sit on the front row. And there's a couple of other speakers. And finally, as soon as he gets up on the pulpit to talk, he looks down at the greenies on the front row. He points his finger at me and says, "You elder, come on up." And I came up there and he put his arm around me and he says, "I want you to bear your testimony in Thai." And, there I was fresh from the United States and my Thai was pretty rusty. It's a tough language to learn. Anyway, so I muttered through my testimony, which I didn't really have at the time. And I didn't know the language. And so, it was pretty tough on me. And I made a vow that I was going to learn the language and I was going to get a testimony. So in Thailand, they would typically have one home. So where I got shipped off to was Udorn. There was a home and then there was a building off the side that was mostly open except for a couple of bathrooms. And so that's where we held our church. I get into country and I'd get up in the middle of the night and I would go into our chapel and I would pray and I would pray. And I remember I couldn't figure out why I wasn't getting an answer. And, maybe I was feeling the Spirit. I don't know. All I know is what I thought I was supposed to get and what I was getting. It was not the same thing. There was a 6x6 post right in the middle of our church that held the roof up kind of in the middle. Anyway, and I remember banging my head against this post thinking, "Dear Lord." And I remember one time I vowed that I would sit there and pray until I got an answer. I vowed by the angels of heaven that I will stay here till I get an answer. And nothing happened. But after I was in country about a month, we were out teaching a young couple the gospel. And we taught them about the Joseph Smith story and about Jesus Christ. And I was asked to say the prayer at the end of the discussion. And I prayed that this couple would know that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, the Book of Mormon is true, and Jesus was the Christ. And as soon as I asked the Lord to tell them the truth, then I was filled with this amazing, it was like the day of Pentecost. I mean, it wasn't just a warm feeling burning in my heart. It was like from my toe to the top of my head. It was just, I was enveloped like Christ put his arms around me. I've never felt the Spirit so strong and the love of God so strong. From then on, I knew what it felt like to have the Spirit, because from then on, when I prayed sincerely and I went out working, I would feel the Spirit quite frequently, and I knew what it felt like. And I had quite some amazing experiences. Normally, you only have one baptism. I had 5. And so I know I worked hard. In fact, when I finally became a senior companion, I set most of all the records in the mission. It was the most hours, the most discussions taught. And we were blessed with some baptisms. And then I became branch president, zone leader, and district president. I remember the first area I went into, there was a guy that was in the branch presidency. My companion was the branch president, but this guy, he was poor. He had 4 children, and he drove a Samla, which is a 3-wheel bicycle, for work. He would take people around on a bicycle. He averaged 5 cents an hour working, and he raised his family on 5 cents an hour. We built his home one time. something happened and he couldn't live where he was. And the Americans, that we were getting out of the Laotian War, so they were closing down the base in Udorn where we were at. And so they let us Americans, the missionaries, have as much wood and material as we wanted. We'd been over there and they said, yeah, we're tearing it all down so you can take whatever you want. So we went over there, we rented a truck for this guy. We went over there and we piled on a bunch of lumber and we built a home for this guy in the branch presidency. And one day we all just got together with nails and hammers and all this lumber and we built a house. Anyway, we went to his home. He was so happy because he was going to be able to feed us, because normally he couldn't afford to feed the missionaries. And what he had to eat once a year, all these ants start flying around, just hordes of them. So they would take nets and they would catch the ants, and then they'd throw these ants into hot lard and fry them up. And so they came out with this plate of fried ants, just heaping fried ants. And my companion was sitting there. He's always, everywhere we went, he was always saying, you got to eat, whatever you're put in front of you, because you'll offend him. And so this time he's like, oh man, I'm not so happy about this dinner we're having here. And so I said, well, I'm going to show him up for once. And so I just took a big handful of these ants and I started chomping down on them. And their legs have the little barbs on them, and the wings, the legs and the wings are really the problem. I mean, they get caught in your throat, man, and it's hard to get them to get unlodged from your throat. One other time, I just been in country a couple of days, and my companion, at night, there's a lot of vendors that come out. Well, during the day too, they have these little food vendors along the road. Anyway, he said, oh man, you got to try this delicacy they have. And it kind of looked like an oblong pronto pup. Anyway, I got one and dipped it in their batter type stuff and popped it in my mouth. And you chew down on it, and all of a sudden it's like, and it just explodes all this stuff in my mouth. And I'm chewing down on it. And man, I'm going, what in the blazes is this? Come to find out is what one of the things that they do is they'd get these little birdies, because they had tons of trees and birds over there. They'd get up in the nest and get the little birdies, and then they would dip them in batter, and that's what you're eating. And so what do you chew down on? Well, obviously the moms would feed the birdies worms and bugs and stuff. And so when you chew down on it, it's like, I'm going, man, no way is this a delicacy that I want to try again. Anyway, there was quite a few food variations over there that we got to try, and usually not like. I remember one time we opened the island of Phuket. We were the first missionaries that had gone to this island, and we had been there about a month, and we were knocking on doors. We had no member referrals, and so it was just all knocking on doors, and it was, hey, is the father of the house home? No, they'd send their kids. You could just hear them send their kids, tell them they were not home, and it got pretty discouraging because we tried all sorts of things and nobody was listening. And so I told my companion, I said, what we need to do is fast and pray and have the Lord just guide us to someone that we can teach and baptize. And he kept telling me, oh no, I wasn't a senior yet. I was still the junior at that point, sorry. He just kept telling me, no, this is how you do it. So he kept saying, no, you just have to put in the time and the effort and the baptisms will come. Anyway, finally he said, fine, this Saturday it's yours. We're going to fast and pray and see if the Spirit will guide us. And so we hopped on our bicycles and drove on our bicycles, maybe a mile or two away to a market. And there was a young man there. He was 18 years old. And we taught him all the discussions, and he got baptized. And so he was the first person to get baptized down in that area. On the island of Phuket, there's some green mountains. And I remember one time it flooded bad. We were out teaching, and it looked like someone was painting the mountains white. And we couldn't even figure out what it was. And it didn't take long before we saw that this rainstorm was coming. Home was on stilts over there because of all the water. We dove into somebody's home But before we did, we were soaking wet. And within 10 minutes, there was 4 inches of water on the ground. And by the time the storm had finished, I went across the street just to show how deep it was. And the water was up to the middle of my chest, but we had a foot of water in our home. And so we ended up not being able to have church then because of all the sediment and stuff. Anyway, we moved up the hill because we didn't want to have that happen again. I remember one time, just after I became a senior companion, we were out tracting, and I went to an area I had never been to before. And as soon as I saw where we were, I yelled at my companion, "Let's get out of here," because it was a street of ill repute with all the women were there, and they love to try to get the Americans, and so before he got away, they grabbed the back of his bicycle. They were trying to encourage him to come inside, and so they were showing things that they shouldn't have. Anyway, I had got away, and I just looked back, and I'm sitting there going, "Oh my." And there's a few experiences like that over in Thailand, they were a lot less afraid of repercussions if certain things happened over there. I went over there, it's been about 10 years now, but I went over there again just to see how it was. I went down to Phuket, and where they used to drive you around in these little 3-wheel bicycles, they now have motorized bicycles and a lot of taxis. And for $15, they take you anywhere in the island. So rather than 5 cents, it's now $15. And so the prices and, the clothes they wear, they become a lot more modern, westernized, where back when I went there, the guys and the gals, they would wrap what they call a pakama around their waist, kind of like just a big piece of cloth that you'd wrap around to cover yourself. Well, by now they're wearing pants and shirts but as far as living the gospel goes, they went to the temple. My mom loved to do genealogy work. She constantly was doing genealogy work, and they enjoyed going to the temple, and you could tell they loved to go to the temple, and they were really good examples of and several times every day now, when I was growing up and even before they died, I really didn't appreciate all the things that they did for me until after they were gone. My mom was so close to Angelic her whole life. She really didn't do anything wrong. She didn't say bad things about anybody. Her language, I remember I said BUM once. I still have a hard time saying the word. And I was going to get my mouth washed out with soap. Roger took my penalty. In fact, he bit a big chunk out of the bar of soap I was going to have my mouth washed out with. And he swallowed it. He took a chunk out of this bar of soap and he ate it. I thought that was really good of him to take my punishment. But just for saying BUM, you can imagine that my mom and dad both, they didn't have anything bad they said. In fact, we didn't drink any cola drinks. Caffeine was absolutely taboo. When I went on my mission, one of my mission presidents said, if the Thais offer you a Pepsi or a Coke, drink it because you don't want to offend them. That's the way my parents were, They taught us to not say any bad words or talk about any bad stories, and living the word of wisdom. They were tenacious. And so that's the way they were on all the aspects of the gospel. I remember I listened to the Carpenters, and it seems like it was a song, "Why do birds suddenly appear?" To me, even now, I think that's pretty mellow. But my dad thought that the music I was listening to was too radical. So he encouraged me to listen to songs like Blue Moon, I mean, the oldie moldies. The one thing that I would encourage others to do is to try to avoid what happened to me. And that is, I didn't even know if I ever felt the Spirit until I was on my mission. I wish I would have worked with each of my children and tried to have them make sure they felt of the Spirit, before they left the house. And I think back on it now, and there's so many things I would have done better as a parent. That my opinion was, if I get to the point where they get married in the temple, then they're on their own. I did my job. I got them in the temple, and they're old enough to know better. And I would have done it a lot different. I would have spent more one-on-one time. With 10 kids, I love spending time with the family, and we went on a lot of trips together and stuff.
If you could see your dad on his 100th birthday, what would you say?
I wouldn't have to say a lot other than I love you, Dad. I would want to just give him the biggest hug and thank him, because literally at least 3 times a day, I thank the Lord for my parents bringing me up in love and in the light of the gospel. And I would thank him. I would thank him for, back when he was putting me on all these crews to do the cement work and the framing and the roofing. He never told me that he was teaching me how to do all these things, but I would thank him for all the knowledge that he gave me, working on all these different teams so I could build my own home. And I would thank him for sacrificing. I was the 9th of 10 children that were raised, but mom had 15 children that she gave names to. And I was the second to the last. What would happen if, they decided not to have 10 children and I ended up who knows where? We would have one celebration. They loved to play rook. When I got a little older, I loved playing games myself. And so I would love to play rook with my dad, and I would thank him. I would thank him for the love that he gave me while here on earth. That's what I would do. And I would hug him. And I'm sure that's what I will do here in about 10 or 15 years.
Well, it's an interesting subject. I mean, you could have lived a boring life, and I don't know that would have been preferable. So,
trust me, I have not lived a boring life. No, it's been pretty. I was always chasing adrenaline rush, no matter where it was. Going down the river, catching 40-foot waves, you name it. I was always looking for adventure.
well, and you mostly survived all that.
Mostly. And the one that did me in were what I call baby waves, but they were shore pounders at Makapu in Hawaii. And I snapped my neck, and I was actually being careful. I mean, I've been in 14-footers, 26-footers, 40-footers, and here these little baby waves, 9-footers, smashed me on the shore and broke my neck.